Have you ever looked at a piece of art or an old building and thought, wow, that is over the top? Chances are you might have been looking at something from the Rococo era. But what exactly is Rococo, and how did this incredibly lavish and playful style come to dominate 18th century Europe? Let's take a journey back in time to explore the dazzling and sometimes scandalous history of Rococo. Our story begins in France around the 1730s. The long and solemn reign of King Louis XIV, the Sun King, had just ended. He was all about grandeur, symmetry, and formality, which was reflected in the heavy, dramatic style of Baroque art and architecture at his Palace of Versailles. But after his death, French society was ready for a change. They were tired of the rigid court life and yearned for something lighter, more intimate, and a lot more fun. This shift was led by the aristocracy. They began to move away from the grand halls of Versailles and back to their chic city homes in Paris, called hetels. These weren't hotels like we think of today, but luxurious private townhouses. They wanted their homes to be comfortable, elegant, and perfect for hosting intimate parties and salons. This is where Rococo was born, not in a grand palace, but in the sophisticated living rooms of the French elite. The word Rococo itself comes from the French word rocaille, which refers to the shell and rockwork used to decorate grottos and fountains. And that gives you a perfect clue about the style. Think curves, asymmetry, and motifs inspired by nature. Delicate shells, twisting vines, and intricate floral patterns. Straight lines were out. Flowing S-shaped curves were in. One of the key figures in the early development of Rococo was the designer Just Rail Mysaniot. He was a master of creating asymmetrical, dynamic designs that seemed to ripple with energy. His work, along with that of other designers, transformed the interiors of these Parisian homes. Heavy, dark wood was replaced with light-colored panels, often painted in pastel shades like sky blue, rose pink, and mint green. Gilded stucco snaked across ceilings and walls, and large mirrors were used everywhere to create a sense of light and space. It was all about creating a bright, airy, and utterly enchanting environment. But Rococo wasn't just about interior design, it completely took over the art world. The leading painter of the early Rococo was Jean-Antoine Watteau. His paintings, like Pilgrimage to Cythera, perfectly capture the mood of the era. He painted elegant figures in lush, dreamlike landscapes, engaged in conversation, music, or flirtation. His works are filled with a sense of gentle melancholy and fleeting pleasure, a style that became known as fete galante or courtly party. Following Watteau were two other giants of Rococo painting, Francois Boucher and Jean-Honoré Fragonard. Boucher was the favorite painter of Madame de Pompadour, the influential mistress of King Louis XV. His art is sensual, playful, and often mythological. He painted rosy-cheeked goddesses and cherubs lounging on fluffy clouds, embodying the carefree and indulgent spirit of the court. His work was pure visual candy charming, decorative, and unabashedly delightful. Then there was Fragonard, whose work is perhaps the most famous example of Rococo art today. His painting, The Swing, is the absolute epitome of the style. It shows a young woman on a swing, being pushed by a bishop, while her lover hides in the bushes below, perfectly positioned to look up her dress as she kicks off her shoe. It's cheeky, flirtatious, and a little bit naughtier perfect snapshot of the aristocratic pursuit of pleasure. The painting's soft lighting, feathery brushstrokes, and lush overgrown garden are all classic Rococo elements. The style quickly spread from France across Europe. In Germany and Austria, Rococo reached its peak in architecture, particularly in the design of churches and palaces. Architects like Balthasar Neumann created buildings that were breathtakingly ornate. Take a look at the Basilica of the 14 Holy Helpers or the Wurzburg residence. The interiors are a whirlwind of pastel colors, swirling stucco, and dazzling gold. It feels less like a building and more like a confectionery masterpiece. They took the French Rococo and turned the volume up to 11, creating some of the most spectacular spaces in the world. In England, the style was a bit more restrained and was often called French style. It was popular in decorative arts like silverware and porcelain. The famous porcelain factories of Sèvres in France and Meissen in Germany produced exquisite figurines and dinner services that graced the tables of the wealthy across the continent. Every object, from a snuff box to a soup tureen, was a miniature work of art, but not everyone was a fan. As the 18th century wore on, critics began to emerge. Philosophers of the Enlightenment, like Voltaire and Diderot, saw Rococo as frivolous, superficial, and morally corrupt. They argued that art should have a moral purpose, that it should educate and inspire, not just entertain and delight. They saw the playful scenes of aristocratic leisure as a sign of a decadent and out-of-touch ruling class. This criticism grew louder and louder, especially as France edged closer to revolution. The extravagance and indulgence of Rococo seemed increasingly inappropriate in a country where many people were struggling. A new style began to take hold. Neoclassicism, inspired by the art of ancient Greece and Rome. Neoclassicism was serious, orderly, and moralistic. It was the complete opposite of Rococo's playful curves and pastel palette. The straight lines and heroic subjects of neoclassical art, like Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Horatii, reflected the new revolutionary ideals of duty, sacrifice, and patriotism.